Once upon a time, and the elders of Agogo will tell you it was not so long ago that the trees have forgotten, and not so recent that the young ones were old enough to see it themselves. There was a woman who sold tomatoes. Now, you may say, what is strange about a woman who sells tomatoes? Every market in every village, in every corner of this great continent, has a woman who sells tomatoes. You have seen her. You know her. She sits behind her tray from the first crow of the morning cockerel to the last light of the afternoon sun. And she calls you as you pass, and she tells you her tomatoes are the freshest and the finest and the most beautiful in the whole market. And sometimes she is right, and sometimes she is telling a story. But either way, you buy from her, and you go home and you cook your stew, and life continues as it was always meant to continue. This woman, this tomato woman of Agogo, was different. Her name was Mame Akua, and her tomatoes were not merely the freshest and the finest in the market. Her tomatoes were, the people will tell you, something that had never been seen before in the whole of the Ashanti region. Something that made grown women close their eyes when they tasted the stew. Something that brought people back to her store week after week after week, as though an invincible thread had been tied between their hearts and her tomato tray. And every Thursday, the thread pulled tight and their feet followed without being asked. And here is where the story begins. My children, here is where you must lean in close and listen. Those same people who came back every Thursday were, by every Friday morning, engaged in a very urgent and very private business of their own, in their bathrooms, and nobody, not a single soul in the whole of Agogo, had yet connected these two facts. Sit down. The fire is warm. This story has many rooms, and we will enter them one by one. It is said that in Agogo, the trees gossip and the river keeps score. It is a village of the Ashanti people, sitting deep in the forest belt where the air is thick and green, and the market days arrive like a celebration that nobody planned but everybody attends. On Thursdays, market day, Agogo becomes a different kind of place. The paths fill with color and noise and the smell of frying plantain and smoked fish and fresh pepper. And the women tie their kente head wraps with the authority of queens walking into a palace. And the men argue loudly about things that do not require arguing about. And the children weave between everyone's legs like rivers finding their path. It was into this market that Mame Akua had come, 19 years before our story, with a tray of tomatoes and a determination to build something. And build she did. She was not, in those first years, remarkable. She sold good tomatoes, honest tomatoes, tomatoes that cooked into an acceptable stew and kept her family fed and her stall running. She had her regulars, she had her rhythm. The market knew her and she knew the market. And all was ordinary. And then the elders say it was in the 4th year before this story reached its ending. Something changed. Nobody could say exactly when. It was like the changing of a season. You do not see the day it changes. You only notice one morning that the air is different, the light is different, that the world has quietly rearranged itself while you were sleeping. The tomatoes were different, deeper in color, heavier in the hand, and the taste. Oh, the taste. The first woman who went home and cooked with Mame Akua's new tomatoes came back the following Thursday with her neighbor. And the neighbor came back with her sister. And the sister came back with the women from her church. And the women from the church told the women from the next street. Before 4 market Thursdays had passed, Mame Akua had a queue. A proper queue with elbows in it. And so it was that Mame Akua's store became the most talked about stall in Agogo market. And so it was that her prices went up and the queue remained. And so it was that the other tomato sellers, Efua and Abena and old Mameya, who had been selling tomatoes since the days of their grandmothers, stood behind their own trays and watched with eyes that saw everything and understood nothing, and whispered to each other, "What is she doing to those tomatoes?" What indeed? Now, hear this carefully, because this is the part of the story that the people of Agogo did not understand was a part of the story for a very long time. Around the same time that the queue began forming at Mama Aqua's stall, around the same time that the whole village was praising the sweetness and the richness and the extraordinary color of those tomatoes, a small, quiet, slightly embarrassing pattern began. Not in the market, at home, in the private rooms of the private houses of the people who had bought the tomatoes and cooked the stew and eaten it with great happiness on Thursday evening. Friday morning, you see, was becoming a very eventful morning in Agogo. Not painful, not dangerous, not the kind of thing that sends you to a doctor or makes you cry or keeps you in bed. Just thorough, a cleansing, a settling of accounts, if you will, between a body and everything it had taken in the night before. The kind of morning that rearranges your plans and requires your full, undivided, uninterruptible attention in one room of the house for a period of time that is no longer than you had expected. You emerge, at the end of it, feeling strangely well. And this, my children, is the extraordinary thing, the thing that made this mystery last as long as it lasted, the thing that the elders shake their heads about even now. The people went back. Every Thursday, they went back to the queue. They complained at home. Yes, they mentioned it to their husbands and their sisters and their closest friends with lowered voices and slightly uncomfortable expressions. But when Thursday arrived and the market opened and the smell of the market reached their noses and the memory of that stew arose in their hearts, the feet walked to the queue before the head fully agreed. Because the stew was too good, because the tomatoes were too beautiful, because there are things in this world that a person knows are not entirely right for them, and they choose the thing anyway. And they tell themselves a story about why it is fine. And they go to bed on Thursday night happy, and they are introduced to the consequences on Friday morning. And so the Fridays continued, and nobody said anything publicly. And Mame Aqua's queue grew longer, and the mystery sat in the middle of Agogo like a stone at the bottom of a river, felt by everyone who walked over it, seen by almost nobody. Almost. Once upon a time, there was a nurse. Her name was Ajoa, and she had lived in Agogo all her life. And she had what her mother called, not always with admiration, a head that did not know how to let things rest. She was 34 years old and she worked at the small clinic at the edge of the village. And every day she saw the people of Agogo in the specific, unguarded way that a clinic sees people. Without their market smiles and their church clothes and their best manners, just as they were, in whatever difficulty had brought them through that door. She noticed things. She had always noticed things. She noticed patterns the way some people notice birds or weather. Naturally, without effort, the pattern simply presenting itself to her eye as though it wanted to be found. And on 3 consecutive Fridays, she noticed this. Patients arriving at the clinic, not ill, not frightened, but reporting stomach disturbance. Mild, passing. They were embarrassed to be there. You could see it in how quickly they explained that it was probably nothing, that they only came because, well, it had happened before. Last Friday too, and the Friday before that. And they wanted to be sure. Adra asked them what they had eaten. Stew, they said. What was in the stew? The usual things, palm oil, pepper, onion, fish, and tomatoes from the market, Which store? A pause. A slight look. The look of someone who does not want to get anyone into trouble. Then, Mame Akua's store. Because that is where everyone buys now. The tomatoes, they are something special. Ajua wrote it down. She did not conclude anything yet. She was not the kind of woman who conclude before the evidence was ready. But she began, quietly, to ask questions. In the market, in conversation, in the easy, unhurried way of a woman who is simply talking to her neighbors. She asked about people's Thursdays. She asked about their cooking. She asked, carefully, casually, how they had been feeling of late. And the answers came back, one by one, with a consistency that made the hair on the back of her neck stand gently to attention. Every Friday, the tomatoes, the queue, the stew, the morning after. Ajua bought the tomatoes herself. She cooked them herself. She ate one serving and she waited. And on Friday morning, before the sun was properly up, while the birds were still deciding what kind of day it would be, Ajua sat in her bathroom and said, out loud, to nobody, "Right, now we begin." And so it was that Ajua opened a small notebook, the kind children carry to school, and she began to write. She bought tomatoes from Mame Akua, and she bought tomatoes from the other sellers, and she set them side by side on her table at home and looked at them in the morning light. And she looked, and she looked, and then she picked up one of Mame Akua's tomatoes and she turned it slowly in her hand. The way you turn a thing when you are telling it that you intend to understand it. There were marks, small ones, too small to notice in the bustle of a market, too regular to be ordinary marks that life leaves on fruits. Punctual marks, the elders would later say when Ajua described them. The precise, deliberate entry points of something thin and sharp. The marks of something that had been put inside the tomatoes and had left its trace on the skin. The skin had closed back around the mark, the way a river closes around a stone, but the mark was there for the eye that was looking for it. Ajua put 3 tomatoes in a bag and she carried them to a friend in Kumasi, a laboratory friend, a friend who owed her a favor and who agreed to run a quiet test without making a noise about it. She waited 10 days. She continued her rounds at the clinic. She continued her careful conversations. She continued writing in her small notebook. She bought more tomatoes, not to eat, but to look at, to count the marks, to understand the pattern more completely. And then the results came from Kumasi. Inside Mame Akua's tomatoes was a compound, a plant-based compound. The paper said, a laxative derivative. Concentrated and soluble and capable of surviving the heat of cooking and entering the stew and entering the body of whoever ate the stew and arriving several hours later at a very specific and very personal destination. It was not a poison. The elders are clear about this. It was not something that wished people harm in the lasting deep way that real harm works. But it was absolutely, without question, without any shade of doubt, not a thing that grows naturally inside a tomato. Mame Akua had been injecting her tomatoes for 4 years, every Wednesday night, in a back room of her house, with a small spray bottle and a thin needle. She had been preparing her stock, injecting each tomato, packing them carefully, going to sleep. And every Thursday, the queue had come, and every Friday, Agogo paid the price. Ajua sat with this knowledge for 2 full days. She turned it over and over in her mind, the way you turn a decision that cannot be undecided once it is made. She thought about what it meant. She thought about who it affected. She thought about the old women who walked far to buy these tomatoes. She thought about the children eating the stew. And she thought about the right way to let a village know a thing it needs to know without causing the kind of damage that cannot be repaired. She had a plan. Now, you must understand something about Ajwa. She was not a woman who liked noise for the sake of noise. She was not a woman who went running to the authorities with a piece of paper before she had thought through what will happen next, and the thing after that, and the thing after that. She had grown up in Agogo. She knew that a village is a living thing, like a person, with a dignity that must be handled carefully, and that the truth, when it arrives badly, can sometimes cause more damage than the lie it replaces. She went first to Efwa. Efwa was the tomato seller who had spent 4 years watching her business slowly drain toward Mame Akwa's queue. For 4 years wondering why. 4 years checking her own tomatoes and finding nothing wrong. 4 years carrying the quiet professional outrage of a person who knows something is not right and cannot prove it. When Ajwa sat with her and told her everything, quietly, carefully, with the laboratory paper on the table between them, Efwa was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I knew it. I knew there was something." Then she said several things in Twi that this narration will not translate, but which the Ashanti people in this audience will understand were both accurate and well chosen. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" Ajwa told her, on the next market Thursday, Efwa would bring fresh tomatoes from the big Kumasi market. Good, clean, honest tomatoes. And she would offer them for tasting at her stall. And at the right moment, in the right way, the comparison would be made. Not staged, not manipulated, just the truth placed in the open air where everyone could see it. Old Mameya, the eldest woman of the market, was also told. She received the information in the way of a woman who has been waiting for a revelation that was always going to come. Not surprised, but satisfied, she said she would be there on Thursday. She said nothing more. When Mameya says she will be there, the matter is serious. This Agogo knows. And so it was that one Thursday morning. The market loud as always, the colors bright as always, the smell of frying food drifting between the stalls as always. The day began like every Thursday, and slowly, gradually, the way a storm builds from the inside out, it became unlike any Thursday that Agogo had seen before. Mame Akoa arrived and set up her store. Her tomatoes were, as always, magnificent. The red of them in the morning light made people slow their step as they passed. The queue began to form. She greeted her regulars. She arranged her tree. She adjusted her edge wrap. It was an ordinary Thursday. Ajua was 3 stalls away, buying garden eggs, watching without appearing to watch. At 10 o'clock, Efua called out from her stall in the easy carrying voice of a market woman who wants to taste fresh Kumasi tomatoes. "Come and taste." No, just come and taste. And people came, the way people always come when something is offered freely. And the group around Efua's stall grew. And then, as natural as breathing, as casual as conversation, the comparison began. Efua's tomatoes against Mama Akua's tomatoes. Right there, in the open market, in front of everyone, people tasted and compared and discussed with the honest enthusiasm of people who love food and love an opinion. And then Ajwa stepped forward, quietly, naturally, the way a person steps forward when they have something to add to a conversation. "Can I ask?" she said, in a voice that was clear but not loud, steady but not hard. "How many of you cooked with Mame Akua's tomatoes last Thursday?" Hands went up, almost every hand in the tasting group. "And how was Friday morning?" My children, the elders say that the silence that followed this question was the most eloquent silence that the market of Agogo had ever produced. 4 seconds of silence, and the dam broke. Every single time. I'm telling you, my husband said it was the palm oil, but I told him, 3 consecutive Fridays. 3! I bought medicine from the pharmacy. I spent money on medicine for tomatoes. I woke up at 3 in the morning and I said to myself, and then the laughter came, because it is the nature of shared embarrassment that when it finally surfaces, when the thing you thought was only happening to you turns out to be happening to everyone. When you discover that the whole village has been quietly suffering the same Friday and pretending they were not. The only reasonable response is laughter. Big, helpless, slightly hysterical laughter. The laughter of a community releasing something it has been holding too long. Mame Akua at her stall had gone very still. Adwa walked to the stall. The crowd followed, not rushing, not aggressive, but with the steady, curious movement of people who have been waiting for an explanation without knowing they were waiting for it. And Mameya was already there. The elders say she had moved without anyone seeing her move, the way elders do when the moment calls for them. As though the occasion itself had brought her there. She stood to the side of Mame Akua's stall, with her hands folded and her face carrying the expression of a woman who has added this moment to everything she has already seen in a long life and found it neither shocking nor forgivable. Ajua placed the laboratory paper on the table. She did not shout. She did not perform. She said, in the voice she used at the clinic when she was telling someone something important, Mame Akua, there is a compound in your tomatoes that does not belong here. I have had it tested in Kumasi. I am not here to destroy you. I am here to ask you to tell us the truth. And here is the thing about the truth. Once it has been placed on a table in broad daylight, in the middle of a market that is watching, it does not wait for permission. It simply sits there and it is true. And everyone can see that it is true. And there is nothing left to do except what Mame Akua did, which was to lower her head and speak. She told them everything. The relative, the compound, the flavor, and the color it produced. How she had watched the queue grow and told herself the stomach consequences were not her problem. How she had told herself, over time, that the cleansing effect was a benefit rather than a harm. How she had constructed brick by brick a story that allowed her to keep doing what she was doing and sleep well at night. She told all of it in the voice of a woman who is tired of a weight she has been carrying and has finally found a place to put it down. When she finished, Ajua said the sentence that Agogo would repeat for years afterward. Nobody complained because they were embarrassed and because the stew tasted too good to stop buying. That is not the same as consent, Mame Akua. The market heard this. The market sat with it. The market understood. The Mameya spoke. Short, clear. The way justice speaks when it knows it does not need to be long. You will stop today. You will come before the market women this Saturday, and you will not pretend that this did not happen. Mame Akua reached under her stall. She brought out the small spray bottle. She brought out the thin needle. She placed them on the table for everyone to see. The market saw. The market remembered. And this, the elders say, is how things must sometimes be done. Not in secret, not in a back office, but in the open air, where the community can witness and understand and move forward together. Once upon a time, the very Saturday after the Thursday of all Thursdays, the market women of Agogo held their meeting. It was supposed to be attended by the usual members. It was attended by half the village because the word had spread and people had found reasons to be nearby. The people in the village always find reasons to be nearby when something worth witnessing is happening. The minutes of that meeting are, to this day, the most entertaining document in Agogo, written in careful office hand by the market secretary, who was doing her best to maintain dignity. Under the section titled Matters Arising is a paragraph that begins, members confirm that the stomach disturbances previously attributed to various causes, including but not limited to palm oil, the dry season, stress, and the water, were found to have a singular origin. Kofi, the teacher, who had over 4 years of consecutive Friday disturbances, attributed the problem to palm oil, then to bad water, then to stress, then to age, Then to a particularly convincing theory about the Harmattan wind, sat in the front row and listened to the full account with the expression of a man whose entire medical history has just been rewritten. When the meeting ended, he sat for an extra 5 minutes before standing. His wife sat beside him and said nothing. She did not need to. She had prepared what she needed to say for a much private and more thorough occasion, and she was saving it. Abena from the fabric store announced at the meeting, and then again at the market, and then to her sister who visited from the next town, and then to anyone who showed any sign of being willing to listen, that she had known, that she had said so, that she had told her husband. Her husband attended the Saturday meeting and confirmed publicly with the resigned energy of a man accepting a verdict that yes, she had told him. Yes, he had disagreed. Yes, she had been right. He confirmed this 3 separate times at 3 separate moments during the meeting because Abena brought it up 3 separate times. The man at the pharmacy who sold digestive tablets reported a mysterious and significant drop in sales the week after the story circulated. He could not explain it until someone told him about the tomatoes. He stood behind the counter for a moment, processing this information. Then he laughed for a long time. Then he became briefly mournful about the sales. Then he laughed again. And wonderful Efwa, patient, 4 years suffering, professionally frustrated Efwa, had the single greatest market Thursday of her 19-year career in the weeks that followed. Her queue formed before she had finished setting up. She sold out before noon. She went home and wept the specific tears of a person who has been vindicated after a very long wait. And her daughter brought her water and asked what was wrong. And Efwa said, "Nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong at all. Everything is exactly right." Now, once upon a time, and here is the part of the story that surprises people, because they expect it to end in ruin, and it does not quite. Mame Akua did not disappear. Her queue vanished overnight, as you would expect. Her reputation took a blow that market reputations do not quickly recover from. The store was quieter. The mornings were slower. There were days when she sat behind her tray and very few people stopped, and she stared at the tomatoes and thought about the years and the decisions and the spray bottle and the needle that she placed on the table in front of everyone. But Mame Akua was 51 years old. She had been standing behind a market stall for 19 years. And the women who have been standing behind market stalls for 19 years are not women who surrender easily. She went back to the relative. The conversation was, by all accounts, not gentle. At the end of it, the relative mentioned, with a slightly guilty energy of someone who should have mentioned this much earlier, that there was another compound, a different one, a natural fermentation accelerant that deepened the sweetness of fruits through a process that involved no consequences whatsoever, no laxative effect, nothing that would send anyone anywhere at 3 in the morning, just flavor, just beautiful, honest, deepened flavor. Why? Mame Akua asked, with a tone that contained several layers of feeling. Had this not been mentioned 4 years ago? The relative did not have a satisfactory answer. Mame Akua tested the new compound at home, alone, for 2 weeks. She ate the tomatoes. She cooked with them. She waited each Friday and nothing came. Just a good stew. Just a peaceful morning. She wept a little, not for herself, but for the 4 years of unnecessary Fridays that people of Agogo had endured because she had been too comfortable in her success to ask the right questions. She came back to the market after 1 month, quietly, without announcement. She set up her store and she arranged her tomatoes and she waited. It took 3 months for the queue to return, and it returned because the tomatoes were still extraordinary, still the most beautiful color, still the richest flavor, and because the people of Agogo had now had 3 months of peaceful Fridays as proof that the problem was solved. One by one, the customers came back. Carefully, cautiously, the way trust returns after it has been broken. Slowly, with memory, but genuinely. Ajwa herself came on the fourth month. She bought a small tray, cooked her stew, and arrived at Friday morning entirely undisturbed. She passed Mame Akua in the market the following Thursday and said, simply, "The tomatoes are good." Mame Akua received this like a gift and said, "I know." And so it was. And so, my children, we arrive at the end of our story, which is not really an end, but the place where the story becomes a teaching, the way all good stories eventually do. The elders of Agogo say this: the sweetest thing that is sweetened by a lie is still a lie. You may taste the sweetness first. You may enjoy Thursday completely, but Friday is coming, and Friday always arrives, and Friday does not negotiate. They also say this: it is a person who looks out for another person. Ajua did not have to open a notebook. She did not have to carry tomatoes to Kumasi. She did not have to stand in a market on a Thursday morning and ask a question that she already knew the answer to, in front of everyone, at the cost of her own comfort and her neighbor's dignity. She could have eaten her stew, endured her Friday, and let the matter rest. Many people did exactly that for 4 years. But Ajua understood, the way nurses understand, the way people who spend their lives paying attention to patterns understand, that the harm that feels small and private is still harm, that the embarrassment which prevents people from speaking is the very thing that allows harm to continue, that the chain of silence, link by link, is heavier than the chain of truth. And Mame Akua, let us be honest about Mame Akua also, because a story that only condemns teaches less than a story that also understands. She was not a wicked woman. She was a businesswoman who found a shortcut and became too comfortable in the results to examine the cost. She told herself a story that let her sleep at night. This is not a sin that belongs only to tomato sellers in Ashanti. This is the sin of every person who has ever benefited from something and chose not to ask too many questions about how the benefit was made. Think about it. You know what I mean. The market of Agogo still runs every Thursday. The tomatoes are still the most beautiful in the region. The same deep color, the same extraordinary flavor, now entirely honestly earned. Mama Akua's stall is full again. Efua's stall is also doing well, because a market that has learned to pay attention is a market that values honest quality. And every Friday morning in Agogo, every peaceful, undisturbed, ordinary Friday morning is, without anyone saying so out loud, a small celebration. A celebration of a nurse with a notebook and a question. A celebration of a community that chose in the end to look at the stone at the bottom of the river rather than keep walking over it. A celebration of the truth that is uncomfortable to speak and essential to speak, and which, once spoken in open air in a Thursday market, said something right that had been sitting crooked for 4 long years. The tomatoes are sweet in Agogo, honestly sweet this time. And that, my children, my people, all of you who have sat with me through this fire, that is the story of the sweetest tomatoes in all of Ashanti. It is told, it is finished, and if you eat stew tonight, check your Friday.